from the streets of San Francisco. These are just a few of the people who have given their lives for our struggle. And we know that unfortunately they are not the last ones. But we know from those of us who are living and standing here today, who come from people who have sacrificed everything so that we can be here, we will never give up on liberation. We will never give up on return. And we will never let what happens to us, to them, happen in silence. We talk about Shireen. Shireen had love for her people. She loved us. You know why? Because she never allowed the violence against us to happen in silence. That's why she covered our news from Freedom Summer, from the rape in Jenin, all the way up to 2021 in Sheikh Jarrah. She was a voice of every single Palestinian household calling in from Quds. You'll remember her voice? She's there, and she said she covered the news. Why? Because she wanted to be where her people were. May we all be so bold. Let's say her name, Shireen Abu Akleh.
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 May she never be forgotten. May we rise in her honor.
Amara. I just spent 3 months in Palestine and I was organizing there, and it's just so clear what's happening on the ground. It's apartheid, it's occupation, it's ethnic cleansing, all of the above, and the people there, they are just incredible. They have the biggest steadfastness that you can imagine. Their resistance is everything, and I'm here to support them. It's all about power, it's all about politics, the military-industrial complex, and the arms forces that are strong, but we are stronger. The people are stronger. Yeah.
It seems like there's been a reaction all over the world against this assassination. Are you shocked by it or surprised by it?
By the assassination? Unfortunately, not at all. I don't think this regime will stop at anything to get their way and to get their land. And I'm glad to see the support that's out there, because Shireen was an amazing woman, and we're here standing behind her and standing behind the Palestinian people.
Why don't you talk about her? What does she represent to you?
Well, my friends in Palestine have been saying that they've followed her since the Intifada and that she has been their voice. And so for them, this is heartbreaking. It's like losing a family member.
My name is Tongo Eisen Martin.
And why are you here today, and what does this mean to you?
I'm here because what's been going on and continues to go on is nothing less than genocide. And so, and we see also that this kind of this rightward march that's trying to catch up with Israel. Every stand we can take, we have to take it. We have to take it together, because there's going to be no sideline soon.
It seems like the United States says they're fighting for democracy in Ukraine, but when it comes to Israel,
definitely. I mean, you can really expect nothing but hypocrisy from an imperialist power. You know, what they say is really just a propaganda tool.
And the idea of Zionism, that the Jewish people have a right to be there when Palestinians are being kicked off the land. I mean, what kind of ideology is that?
It's a settler colonial ideology, and we should just go ahead and separate Zionists from Jewish people, because one is a people and the other is some people who subscribe to a settler colonial ideology that's all about just the extermination of whatever indigenous people is there. We've seen the same thing here. We've seen the same thing all over the world, you know.
And the United States is spending billions of dollars on Israel. In San Francisco, you have homeless people. People can't get health care. People can't get housing. Right. Where are the priorities?
The priorities are to maintain ruling class hegemony. Always has been, always will be, until we put an end to it.
And as a poet, what can artists do with cultural workers around this issue?
Well, we see the importance of culture, man. If you, if we put the lens back on, it's kind of more right-wing fascist forces. We see how much of a cultural project that was, right? And so, as far as scaffolding, moments of revolutionary organization or scaffolding struggle, cultural workers are right there to really to normalize a correct analysis. I always got a short poem. Well, I got a poem I can make short. Well, actually, the rally is, I think it's beginning, but I go to the railroad tracks and follow them to the station of my enemies. A cobalt-toothed man pitches pennies at my mugshot negative all over the United States. There are toddlers in the rock. I see why everyone out here got in a big cosmic basket and why blood agreements mean a lot and why I get shot back at. I understand the psycho-spiritual refusal to write white history and take the glass freeway.
My name is Munadil Herzallah. I'm here representing US Palestinian Community Network, a nationwide organization that have a few chapters throughout the states. The Zionist movement tried to control the Jewish voice in the labor. Therefore, it is very, very parallel to what happened in Israel right now, and they basically diluted the voice of the working families, the work class, and they're part of the machine of the Democratic Party instead of being a force that do introduce and build on accumulating victories of the working families. They're like diffusing that and siding with Israel. Definitely divert the whole movement towards conservatism. It's not by surprise that Trump is the biggest fan of the settler colonial state of Israel, and they have all the conservative do with that. How could you make a balance with that and being and claim to be representing the working families of America? And we have a lot of education to do with our rank and file, meaning that they feel they know exactly what the problem is. And once they discover, they find out that this millions of dollars that's been spent on occupation instead of housing, instead of healthcare, instead of issues that is really a matter of interest to the working class, then it becomes then we will feel the shift. I think they're totally out of touch. They are totally not qualified to represent the working families. You know, all these millions of dollars going to support a military occupation must be stopped. And yeah.
And there's an effort to shut down discussion even of resolutions around Zionism in the Labor Council.
Yeah,
it seems like it's right here in San Francisco.
It's not by accident that when the Labor Council initiated a resolution to stop aid to Israel, the council received a memo, quote unquote, from the AFL-CIO claiming to be that this discussion is not to be taking place in the Labor Council, which is nothing but circumventing the voices of the rank and file and then claiming to be representing the working families.
Okay, what can workers do in this country to support the Palestinian people and workers?
I think the best thing to do is to build as much pressure as possible to divert all this money, $3.8 billion a year that is going to the state of Israel, supporting occupation and supporting forces that is denying workers to go to work from Palestine to the factories that's there, preventing from working, from supporting their own family.
The conditions of these Palestinian workers in Israel.
It is we're very similar to the condition that blacks in South Africa are going through. So we believe that it's not by coincidence that there is a movement that is declaring that Israel is become to be an apartheid state. And the only way that we could do that is to continue boycott, divestment and sanctions against this entity, and we're very, very confident that this thing will happen, no matter how long it's going to take.
And the longshoremen have boycotted Zim ships. Do you think there needs to be more action by workers in this country to support the Palestinian workers?
I think I think they did an amazing job in stopping the Zim's ship and cost them a lot of money. And this is what it is all about. It's not about sympathizing with unfortunately, it's not about sympathizing with the justice in Palestine as much as looking at the occupation entity of Israel as a losing project, losing investment. This money is not going anywhere except, destroying houses, uprooting trees, ethnic cleansing, and that's by no means benefiting the working families.
Okay. I'm Saif from the Palestinian Youth Movement. So we're here today to basically mark the Nakba, which is the Palestinian catastrophe, the collapse of Palestinian society in 1948 after the establishment of the State of Israel. We're here to stand in solidarity with Palestinians who have been subjected to an unprecedented level of violence by the Israeli state. We've seen in Gaza in May of last year, we've seen yet another operation against the people of Gaza where over 100 people were killed, mostly civilians, including children. The Strip continues to be subjected to an illegal siege where Palestinians cannot have their basic needs met, where the vast majority of children are suffering from PTSD. In the Negev or the Nakba region, we see Palestinians resisting their ethnic cleansing in response to Israeli plans to forcibly evict them from their ancestral homelands in the Negev desert. In Jerusalem, we've all seen the scenes in Sheikh Jarrah where Palestinians are fighting to retain the deeds to their homes in efforts to ethnically cleanse them from East Jerusalem in order to fulfill Israel's goal of a so-called Jewish demographic majority, which is not something we expect any democracy to do, to engage in gross ethnic engineering. And we are here today to honor Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist that was murdered May 11th by the Israeli occupation forces in Jenin. And so that is why we are here today.
And it seems like she's not the first journalist that has been targeted.
No, she is definitely not the first journalist that's been
Why don't you talk about the targeting of journalists?
Yeah, so since 2002, there have been 43 journalists that Israel has murdered. And the reason why they murder journalists is because they document Israel's crimes that are plain as day. Journalists are not only murdered, they're subjected to brutal violence by settlers as well, who injure them, who sometimes fire rubber-coated steel bullets on them. And we are here to honor those journalists who have the bravery of documenting Israel's brutal aggression against the Palestinian people. Since 2002, there have been 43 journalists that Israel has murdered. And the reason why they murder journalists is because they document Israel's crimes that are plain as day. Journalists are not only murdered, they're subjected to brutal violence by settlers as well, who injure them, who sometimes fire rubber-coated steel bullets on them. And we are here to honor those journalists who have the bravery of documenting Israel's brutal aggression against the Palestinian people.
And the role of the United States is arming Israel, supporting it. Why don't you talk about why that is and what people can do about it in the United States?
Yeah, so the U.S. sends $3.8 billion a year in military aid to Israel. There are no conditions on this aid. We are calling for the immediate end to this aid. The U.S. claims that Israel is a so-called democracy, but is anything but a democracy. Name me a single other democracy that engages in ethnic engineering where the politicians, plain as day, explain that they have plans to Judaize specific areas, which basically means to bring in settlers of a specific ethnic group at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian people. And the U.S. is complicit in this because Israel carries out the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian people, and the U.S. basically never votes for any resolutions in the United Nations to condemn Israel. It continues to protect Israel from any resolutions that do. So it has diplomatic and military aid, efforts to protect Israel, and has unconditional military aid that is going to the Israeli authorities. So Americans need to know that their tax dollars are going to funding war crimes in Palestine, and that they should pressure their politicians in order to not support Israel any longer. And think it is a fundamentally racist ideology.
With Violette, with a poem.
So I wrote this poem this week when we heard the news of Shireen on Tuesday night. I was in my living room with some friends. We started listening to this song, Hilwe Chow, which is the Arabic version of Bella Chow. Just trying to understand and take in what had happened. And the songs are really beautiful and poetic and are a tribute to our martyrs. And it felt like when you were listening to that song that they were really talking about Shireen. So I wrote this poem with all of the anger and the sadness that came in that moment. All of the Arabic verses in the line are lines from the song Hilwe Chow. So this is for Shireen Abu Akleh. على شروق الشمس صحيت من نومي وكان بيزحف في العدو. The enemy lurks in every corner, waiting for the moment. Every moment is cruel and unforgiving. The enemy lurks everywhere, behind an army uniform or in a friend's eyes. There is no escape. Yet still, we resist. يا مقاوم خدني أنا وإنت سوية إحساسي إني حكون شهيد. Resistance is not a word, not a thought, not an idea. Resistance is an act of sacrifice. A sacrifice for freedom, not just your own, at the risk of your own. Resistance is a fight for freedom, raised from a love for the land and for the people, a love stronger than any other love. Resistance is a long, deep, painful breath, yearning for freedom through the eye of a slingshot, a tunnel underground, or the barrel of a gun. سقطت شهيدا وأنا أقاوم يا رفيقي بإيدك ادفني. The occupier's bullet does not discriminate. A child hiding in his father's arms, a paramedic tending to the wounded, a blind mother of 6 at a checkpoint, youth defending their camp, a journalist known and loved by everyone with a satellite, a journalist with press across her chest. In the camp of resistance, the occupier's bullet does not discriminate, because we are all the same, a virus in their system. The harder they try to extinguish the fire, the larger it grows. بإيدك ادفني بأعلى الجبل تحت ظل أجمل وردة. Held by loving hands, wrapped in the people's pride, carried through the streets and returned to the land. Longing for the dirt of its village, the blood of our martyrs runs eternal. From highest mountain to lowest valley, from river to sea. رح كل البشر يمروا بحدي يعطوني اسم أجمل وردة. Never resting, never at peace, the blood of our martyrs is hot, boiling, blistering the earth into blazes of beautiful red, blossoming bloody into a fire that burns immortal inside each of us who refuses to forget. The land remembers too and builds their blood an eternal home in the shine of red poppies, blooming in thousands, burning within us, so we remember and never forget that resistance is an act of sacrifice, raised from a love stronger than any other love. Long after the sun falls and the blood dries, the poppy still grows, an endless bloom, a long, deep, painful breath, yearning for freedom. هاي الوردة وردة مقاوم سقط من أجل الحرية. Glory to resistance, glory to our martyrs until complete return and total liberation. Thank you.
Abu Akleh!
Shireen Abu